Hey CNFers, this episode is sponsored by Liquid IV, and I gotta say, some delicious stuff. Nice way to rehydrate and fuel those endurance activities, or if you just want to zhuzh up your water. It's some tasty stuff. Been a big fan of the lemon lime. Non-GMO, free from gluten, dairy, and soy. There's a sugar-free version too that I've really dug, the white peach. Should really go for that. Get 20% off when you go to liquidiv.com. Use the promo code CNF at checkout. That's 20% off anything you order when you shop Better Hydration today using the promo code CNF at liquidiv.com.
Solitary writer at kitchen table calls murder suspect's son to see if they're aware that their father was involved in a murder or not.
Hey CNFers, it's CNF Pod, the creative nonfiction podcast, a show where I speak to badass people about telling true stories. I'm Brendan O'Mara. It's that Atavistian time of the month, so we got a new issue of the Atavist coming out today, featuring the writer Tom Donaghy. Tom is a screenwriter by trade, and he dipped his toe into the journalistic waters to try and solve a cold case, the murder of the Fudge King, Ocean City's Harry Engelmeyer. A local luminary, a member of the queer community, and a perceived threat to the perfect picture along the Jersey Shore. You can read the story at magazine.atavist.com. I encourage you to subscribe, and no, I don't get any commissions. I'd tell you if that were the case. If you head over to brendano'mara.com, you can read show notes and sign up for my Rage Against the Algorithm newsletter, a curated list, an essay by your resident crank, book recommendations, stuff to make you happy, stuff to make you think. Goes up to 11. Literally, the list is 11 items long. First of the month, no spam, can't beat it. Also, consider heading to patreon.com/cnfpod. Sure, I'm asking for some money, but what you get is more than the satisfaction of helping this podcast. You get access to a community of other CNF and writers. Lately, I've been starting these threads, and then you talk amongst yourselves. Don't lurk. Jump in and contribute to the conversation. Maybe find a way to exchange contact info. Make a friend. Patreon.com/CNFpod. And we got 3 new patrons. Thank you to Louise Julig, Caroline Rothney, and welcome back, David Yemaine. That's amazing. Really cool. Free ways to support the show. You can always leave a review on Apple Podcasts or ratings on Spotify. And one last thing. Shout out to Athletic Brewing, my favorite non-alcoholic beer out there. Not a paid plug, but I am a brand ambassador, and I love to celebrate this amazing thing. If you head over to athleticbrewing.com, use the promo code BrendanO at checkout, you get a nice little discount on your first order. I don't get any money, and they are not an official sponsor of the podcast. I just get points towards t-shirts and hats or beer. Give it a shot. All right, but before we get to Tom, we're going to hear from Jonah Ogles, the lead editor of this piece for The Atavist. He's got some really, really beautiful insights that I think you're going to want to consider as you go about your CNFing journey. Here we go. Riff. You identify as common hang-ups among the entire stable of Atavist writers that you routinely not routinely work with, but just in general, like what writers tend to need?
There's sometimes reporting questions. I mean, that comes up a lot, actually, that just like in the process of reporting, you hit a wall with something, either reaching a source or finding a document or anything like that. So those come up quite a bit. And then I feel like there are certain writers who want to talk as they're writing the draft, who they hit like a point in writing the story where they feel like they don't know exactly what to do, or they want somebody to look at the first section to make sure they're on the right track, or the first big chunk of words. It's funny, if there's a writer like that, they tend to reach out kind of early and often. I think there are writers who just want like the collaboration and interaction and advice, and which I think is smart, and I appreciate that. Especially if they're having trouble, I'd much rather know about it early and be able to kind of talk it out and at least be on the same page about what we're trying, even if it ends up not working in the end. And then there are some writers who just kind of want to be left alone to do their thing, and they turn in the story and it's pretty good. So it just kind of depends. But I feel like reporting and then the draft stage are the 2 points where writers often reach out.
Would you say that when in doubt, you'd like to hear more from the writer early on, just so they don't paint themselves into corners that can be really hard to get out of?
Yeah, totally. If a writer feels like something isn't going right, they are probably correct in that assessment. If they need help, I would much rather be aware of it and talk it through and just like come up with a plan together so that we know what's happening with the story, because there's nothing more frustrating from my standpoint than like getting a draft, reading it, and being like, what did this person say when you talk to them? And then the writer's response is, well, I never did talk to them because they never picked up the phone or whatever. Or I couldn't get these documents because they said it wasn't subject to the FOIA laws. And like I would always rather know that in advance, even though I guess there's not much of a difference between saying, oh, try these things now that the draft is written versus doing it before the draft. I like being made aware of any issue up front. Writers shouldn't feel that they're like inconveniencing me, at least. Maybe other editors are different, but Sayward and I like to communicate a lot. So we really encourage writers reaching out.
And when a writer is stuck or spinning his or her wheels or their wheels, what is a way that you try to get them back on track, or just how do you coach them back if they're stuck?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times they just in talking to me, they coach themselves back,
Right.
like
Yeah.
I'm a therapist basically, saying, yeah, writing's hard. And they sort of come up with a solution just as they're talking to me. For writers who are feeling stuck in a draft, there are a couple of things that I've tried over the years that seem to be pretty helpful. And if they're just having trouble getting started, or like just kind of getting words on the page, and this is not an original idea of mine, I picked it up from probably dozens of other people who have recommended it, but just like starting a draft in an email, like you're going to email your buddy who you want to tell the story to. Just starting to write an email, for some reason that's a little bit different than doing it in a Word document, and the words just come a little easier, so they're not as, I think there's less pressure to like make it right, and you just sort of get it out. So that often helps. I mean, a lot of times what I'll do with with writers is they'll be talking to me, they're stuck, and what they really need to say is, and then they say it to me, and I'll just let them finish and be like, that thing that you just told me, that's a paragraph, like start there and build out from it. And recording yourself, I think, would probably be an easy way to do that. If the editor isn't reachable, or just as another way to try it. For writers who are having trouble with the structure, I use a trick that Alex Hurd taught me at Outside, where you just distill the section down to like 2 sentences. So like, Brendan encounters difficulty on his hike at 10,000 feet, wonders if he should be doing this, period. And then you look at the next section, you do the same thing, and what you end up with is like 500 word summary of the story, and you can just look at it, and the sentences should still basically flow because your idea should flow that way. So after Brendan encounters trouble, the next one should probably address how Brendan deals with that, and so when you look at it that way, it's often pretty easy to identify, oh, hey, this section is out of place, or it's not covering the ground that it needs to. Let's move it or revise it so that it is tied into the section that precedes it and follows it.
Very nice. And with Tom's story here, this kind of cold case that he tracks down and tries to solve this mystery of a murder of the Fudge King on the Jersey Shore. How did this strike you when it came across your desk, and just what were some of the unique challenges that this story presented to you on your side of the table?
Yeah, well, this was an interesting one because it was one of those drafts that came in. It came in draft form. The pitch was the draft. He'd done the work. He'd done all the reporting. So we were able to look at something very close to the finished product. And what struck Sayward and I about it when we first read it was that it was just so fun. And I know that there's sort of like a jaded editor mindset of dealing with stories that involve tragedy, where we just sort of ignore like the subject in order to talk about the writing. But the writing was just so fun, and it was clear that he was having a good time as he was writing it. And it just felt very kind of lively and right in front of you. We pretty quickly realized like this is a good one for us. It has a lot of the things that an Atavist story should have, and it also has this writer who's just really has a good sense of like how to tell a good story.
Yeah, and it's given that it's a murder that takes place in the 60s. Because it's much farther away? Does that grant the writer maybe a little more leash to play with the story versus having it to be like really, really sensitive to someone who lost their life?
Yeah, right. I mean, yes, and I think the short answer is yes. When it's when there's a tragedy that occurred a long time ago, you're not as concerned about living sources for whom this might be a really sensitive topic, and who might be very concerned with how they're portrayed in a story. I do think that gives writers a little bit more leeway with how they approach it. That said, I mean, one of the things that happened during the editing of this story is Tom really wanted to work in his, I guess for lack of a better term, the relationship he sort of built with Harry Engelmeyer, the Fudge King who was murdered in 1964, because he felt a connection to Harry as a person. And that was probably one of the bigger things we added as the story moved through drafts, is just a line here, a line there, trying to just make that connection feel real to readers.
Yeah, and what was the connection that you felt that Tom was seeking with the central figure of this piece?
Well, they have a lot in common. Tom grew up kind of in the same region. Obviously, it spent summers in Ocean City, where Harry had his fudge shop. Grew up eating the fudge, so there's sort of that aspect of it. And also, Harry was gay. Tom is gay. So they have that shared experience of growing up in that very particular part of the world, and in the way that people there viewed gay people and their place in the world. So he had a lot of stuff, and he actually writes in the story that at times he almost felt as if Harry was kind of like reaching through time to like urge him on. And I think he came to identify a lot with Harry and in the position Harry found himself in that moment in time.
Oh, very nice. Well, Jonah, as always really cool to get your side of the table on these things, and also to drop in some little things that might help some other writers out there, as they work with editors to get some of their to get the best, put their best narrative foot forward. So, as always, Jonah, thanks so much for the conversation here.
My pleasure.
All right, we are stepping right up to the plate with Tom Donaghy. This man doesn't have any social media presence, which I deeply admire, as you know, your resident rager against the algorithm. Or maybe he has some for research's sake, but that's about it. You can learn a bit about him at tomdonaghy.com, and you're about to learn a whole lot more about Tom and his story about Ocean City's Fudge King, and why Tom needed to solve this near 60-year-old cold case. Let's do this.
Oh man, I'm not sure it did, to tell you the truth. And in fact, I started looking into this story because I was researching it for what I thought might be a screenplay or a limited series. That's how I spend my time at this point in my life. And then once I got into it, I began to just the research took me deeper and deeper and deeper. And what happened was I had all this material, and then the strike hit, the WGA strike hit, and so I couldn't. I don't know if you're going to want to include this, but I couldn't pursue it as any kind of screenplay or limited series. And one of my reps said, "Why don't you write an article about it?" And I said, "Well, I've never done such a thing." And they said, "Well, you've got all this material, give it a shot." So that's how this happened. I kind of backed into it, which is how much of my career has unfolded, to tell you the truth.
Is that how, like, did you set out to be a screenwriter, or like you said, you kind of found yourself backing into it somehow?
I did not set out to be a screenwriter either. I mean, I was a playwright in New York. I consider myself a playwright, by nature and history. And then I was visiting Los Angeles, and I took a meeting, and I ended up in television. And at a certain point, I started writing screenplays, and so this article came about in a kind of organic way. As I say, someone suggested I do it. And then I thought, well, this would be an interesting way to arrange this material. I had no idea what I was in for. I had no idea what it meant to investigate a cold case crime. I do have journalists in my life, and they were helpful, but it's not what I meant to do. And it took the stuffing out of me, let me tell you. But it's been extremely gratifying.
In what way did the story take the stuffing out of you?
Well, in so many ways. It takes place in this landscape, Ocean City, New Jersey, where I visited as a child every summer, and where people I know still live. And I was dealing with people who remembered this crime. I ended up speaking to one of the eyewitnesses to Harry Engelmeyer's murder. I talked, of course, to Leland Stanford, who's in the piece, the public defender of the man acquitted of this crime. I had I didn't know how to do such things or approach such things, but I just kept going where the story led me. I guess that's what a journalist does. In this case, it was almost, I don't want to say not choiceful, but there was something about this story from the beginning, from when my brother brought it to me, that has led me more than I've chased it. One thing led to another. One person led to another, to a Facebook post, to a phone number, to a website, to a blog. It was as if I was being, sort of pulled through this. Now, I went happily, and but I was dealing with real people and real history, and that's not generally what I do. So that's what took the stuffing out of me. And I want to honor the truth as I understand it, and it's a slippery truth. And I want to honor this man, Harry Engelmeyer, who is, a fascinating I keep wanting to use the language of television and screen, which I was about to say character. He's not a character.
Mm.
He was a man. And so all of this is different to me.
Yeah, and and speaking with Jonah, like I understand that you just had like a really a good connection, if you will, to Harry, and I wonder if maybe you can articulate what that connection was and why you maybe felt so strongly about him.
Right. Well, first of all, he was a charming, by all accounts, a charming, good, fun, guy. I have a photo of him that I keep, and he's someone I'd want to hang out with. And he was a gay man, as am I, who lived in this town where I grew up long before I ever visited it, and somehow made it not just a success of himself, but a real splash. And by all accounts, many accounts, most accounts, was really well loved and well regarded and respected. And yet he was mostly openly gay, as openly gay as he could be in 1964. So all of this was astonishing to me. He was good to his family. He was good to his workers. He was engaged civically. He was trying to move this place, this small town founded by Methodists, into the future. I mean, I was thinking about him this morning. I think about him frequently, but I left that place. I left the places where I grew up to go to places where there would be people more like me. He stayed and wanted to change it from within. I would not have had that fortitude. So he has my respect and affection, from this distance.
Now it's clear that you really have like a connection to him and a genuine like to use the character term, but like kind of a love for this character, and given that he was a real live person who was just tragically brutally murdered, what to what extent was did you feel like the weight of wanting to honor his story over the course of the reporting and the writing of this piece?
Well, tremendously. I at times it was I didn't know if I could rise to the occasion, to tell you the truth. I
Yeah.
mean, the other thing about him that is so striking is, that town was and is it's America's greatest family resort. That's what it calls itself. It was, and I remember as a child seeing families around me, men and women families with children, and that was the only family. And there was it was a very Christian community, and especially in 1964, he was saying, you know what? I don't want you to tell me what to do on Sundays. I want to make some fudge. I want to sell it. I want to be a businessman. That was really provocative, and it's still provocative. We live in a world and where we're still being told what we might, maybe should be doing on Sundays. So, I he came to be a hero to me, and wanted to. That's I wanted to make sure he was a hero to everyone who would read the piece. So that's what I endeavored to do.
When you're dealing with in the nonfiction world, and then you come across someone of this nature who you just by virtue of what they stood for, you come to very much admire them, and then like you were saying a moment ago, like feeling like can you rise to the occasion to tell their story and honor them, like that is a psychic burden that so many writers of nonfiction feel, and it's just great to hear you articulate that because it is tough to do.
It is tough to do, and I need a rest after this. but but don't get me wrong, it was invigorating, and it engaged the people around me, my family, who I mentioned in the piece, who were and are so invested in this, and the people I talked to on the ground in Ocean City. And that was new to me. That's when you make up stories in your head, you're in your head. But this was me going into the world, and it was very, very gratifying in a way that I'm not generally gratified by what I do. So I might yet do it again, but as I say, this story fell in my lap. I'm not sure a story like this would fall in my lap again. In fact, I'm sure it would not.
Yeah, and given since you weren't trafficking in, let's say, imagination, where you can patch in those kind of holes with your own creativity, this way you're beholden to the facts, and if you need a certain information, you need to go out and seek that particular person out. So, in what way was that a challenge, or maybe not a challenge, for you over the course of the generation of this piece?
Well, as I say, this piece had a strange evolution. I thought I was doing research for a story, and then I found no, I was actually going to be investigating what happened in this cold case murder, and that happened about when I got the files, the investigation files from the Atlantic County Prosecutor's Office after making an open public records request. And when I got those files, 168 pages, I realized most profoundly that I was on a whole new journey. So I had to really get down to business, and I worked with a research assistant, and we made Excel spreadsheets and contact lists, and it, I turned into a different kind of writer because of wanting to get it right.
Well, and given that you had, journalist friends in your orbit, what kind of
Yes.
counsel did you seek from them for this?
Well, I would call. I have a friend who writes for the New York Times, who's a great guy, and I would call him and say, "How do you call someone up and say, do you realize your father may have been the actual murder in a cold case? How do you do that? There was I had no idea." And I would say, what are the rules around quoting people? I didn't know if you could change a word. And I should say that Jonah and everyone at the Atavist was extremely helpful in holding my hand through this. I didn't know what the protocol was. Toward the end of this experience, once it was an article, I didn't know how to circle back to law enforcement and say, we're going to print this as an article. Do you have any comments? I needed a real help. So I just asked and asked and asked, which is, what I do generally. I'm not afraid of asking a question, and just hope that people would answer. And many people did not. Many people initially talked to me, then wouldn't. Some of that is in the piece, and that was confusing. But that's par for the course, it turns out. So I was learning as I went.
As someone who kind of struggles making cold calls and having that initial conversation, especially when you have it's a foreign phone number popping up on someone's phone, and you got to pitch them real quick who you are, that you're not a robocaller, that you're not a scammer of some kind, and that you're looking to talk to them for certain information. So for you, what was that experience like for you that might help other people who struggle with the cold calling nature of this line of work?
Right. Well, I always wrote a script for myself before I made such calls. And in fact, I wrote several variations of that script, depending on how the call might proceed,
Yeah.
So I had 2 or 3 versions in front of me. Some people I had phone numbers. Some people I only had emails, some people I reached out to on Instagram. Actually, Christopher Brendan Hughes' son, maybe I shouldn't be saying this, but he's only has a social media presence. So I reached out to him. I did not, by the way. I heard back from him, but he didn't engage about the piece. Again, I just groped through the darkness and just went by instinct. But I tried to be as prepared as I possibly could be. I tried to have in my head, or at least in front of me on a piece of paper, all the questions I could ask. And then within that, if they only gave me 5 minutes, the three most important questions I needed to ask, So a lot of this was just prepping before I got to the actual interviews. I had, then, I should say there were people like Joyce Lickfeld, like Leland Stanford, who I talked to on several occasions. So that was because they were open, and one conversation opened up a lot of new questions. So then I would prepare a whole new script and proceed that way. So I'm not sure I could give a master class in this. In fact, I know I couldn't, but I somehow found my way as time went on.
I find the script is helpful to have that down just at an open screen in front of you. You tend not to stumble over yourself. You're getting quick and to the point, and
Yes.
it definitely it helps you from stammering over yourself and sounding fretful, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. And of course, I generally write scripts. So for me, that was what came naturally.
Interior, picking up the phone.
Exactly. Solitary writer at kitchen table calls murder suspect's son to see if they're aware that their father was involved in a murder or not.
Oh my gosh.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Gosh, what like that must have been like you talk about a butterflies in the stomach call. Like what was that like? Take us to that moment of dialing that phone number.
well, right now I'm remembering Beth Blevin, who her father is mentioned in the piece as being a suspect, or at least a suspect. He wasn't an official suspect. He was a suspect in the minds of people on the ground in Ocean City for many years. And, for real reasons, it seemed to me, at first anyway. And that was such a long road even to get to her because that family was so off the grid. But I finally got her, and I just tried to be as respectful and as journalistic in the way I understood it as I could
Mm-hmm.
be, and lead with my uncertainty about what I was suggesting, and saying I was just after the truth, and using the names that may have paved the way to get me to that phone call. And sometimes my credentials, when you work in Hollywood, people answer the phone.
Mm-hmm.
um, so I just tried every trick in the book, and she was taken aback to hear that her father had been thought of as a killer. She had not heard that. That was another great mystery, getting to her, and I was rather shocked because I had heard her father's name from several sources as being involved in this murder. But she was open and honest, and she had spent several years of her life taking care of her father at the end of his life. And she gave me the number of her sister, and I talked to her sister. The talking to them, because I do like talking to people. I like hanging out and getting to know people. So that's kind of how I dealt with it. It was after the fact that I thought, oh man, you know, did you just ruin this person's day? Or, yeah, and especially talking to some of the older people, who remember this as a very traumatic experience, Harry Engelmar's murder, and the trial, and 5 years after the murder, and Joyce Lickfeld, who had me to her house. That was intense. I actually brought my mother and my brother, who are mentioned in the piece, and Joyce had with her sister and her son. We sat around a table full of bagels and muffins and coffee and talked about a murder she had witnessed in 1964, and she was the eyewitness to this murder, and it was not easy. But people are people, and if you, I think, present with mm, a sense of, I'm just trying to understand this story because I think it's a story that needs to be told, people are generally responsive, unless of course, they have something to hide.
Right.
And then doors were shut, and you know, there were some people who, as I say, who talked to me and then didn't want to talk anymore. You know, that happened more than a few times, which is fair enough.
And a moment ago, you talked about how you're kind of writing through the darkness, and I wonder for you, like as you're writing through the darkness, how best do you illuminate that path?
That's a great question. How best? You know, I just kept my eye on the answers. I just kept thinking, this is for him. This is for Harry. I just kept that in my head. And I relied on my friends. You know, I'm sure they are complaining about me behind my back. You know, I really did need people to sort of help me through. Again, this story connects to my personal history in so many ways that there was no not telling it. And I kept thinking, this connects to the landscape where I grew up. Something about this story reveals to me something about the landscape where I grew up, the people I grew up with, you know. And so that kind of notion led me through.
Yeah, having that North Star and that connection to Harry and wanting to do right by him too. It's like kind of when you get bogged down by the weight of it, or you want to give up. You kind of have something that's like, oh, I have something of a bigger purpose in telling this story too.
There's no question. And, you know, there's this thing about this story, which is to say it is queer history that ran parallel to accepted history, you know, and I'm super interested in those stories. This is as much a part of the history of that city as the history of the blue laws there, or the beaches that were segregated by tradition, or the Methodists who founded that city that Gay Talese, mentions in his books. And it had not been told. So that's what carries me through. You know, uh, I feel suited, I guess, to tell this particular strain of history, which is this man who was a gay man. I don't know how he identified, but there's no question he was a gay man, and that to me has always been important in storytelling. The stories that are missed, the stories that run alongside actual history, and probably that above all is what carried me through.
Yeah, and I guess this, earlier when we were talking about your screenwriting roots and how that maybe helped you with this story, I think a lot of reporters, narrative journalists, they don't have as great a handle on those sort of cinematic blocks that really move a story forward. They're very good at gathering information, sometimes very good at writing information, but when it comes to pacing, suspense, scenes, sometimes that takes a bit of a heavier lift on the part of a narrative journalism writer. In what ways did your screenwriter experience like really kind of help you propel this story and structure it?
Oh wow! It struck me as such a cinematic story at first. You know, that the world of the Jersey Shore at that time, very sort of quaint, very picturesque. Ocean City, extremely charming cottages and Victorian architecture, and the ocean and the boardwalk. It's stuff you have seen, on the screen, and the feeling of it just struck me as this kind of noir. So I had in mind, Double Indemnity and Scorsese, and it's just sort of part of what's in my head. I'm glad that ends up in the piece. I can see the world. I can see it too because I grew up in it. And there's also this great juxtaposition of Ocean City, America's greatest family resort, and Atlantic City next door, which was debauched and corrupt. And in 1964, when Harry was murdered that summer, the Democratic National Convention came through, and there was this light on Atlantic City, and people were appalled by what they saw. So you had these two very different places, almost right next to each other, and it's something. I had postcards up. I as I went, I started to collect. On eBay postcards of all the places mentioned in the story. They're all up on. I have a wall that's all corkboard. So the visual of it was. I wanted to be inside the world visually as well as all the other ways one needs to be inside a story. It's just what I guess I do by nature, and this story lends itself to that. I think. I remember even as a kid just being so struck by that landscape. I grew up in a rather, I guess, homogenous suburban suburb, a suburb of Philadelphia, and then you'd go to the shore, and it was another world. It was people having cocktails and wearing a bathing suit and smelling of cigarettes. All of this was delicious to me. Not and then you'd have Harry Engelmeyer's Fudge.
Yeah.
It was a very sensual place. Very, I can picture it still.
Do you find yourself to be much of a like an outliner, or are you kind of like by the seat of your pants, just kind of like just see how it flows out, or you follow something of a map along the way?
Absolutely. Well, absolutely outliner. And that's not how I started writing. When I wrote plays, I didn't outline, but writing film and television, it's part of the industry. It's part of what's required. It's actually super helpful to have a place to go, beat to beat to beat. And that was really my first task in organizing all this material was to plan out all of it. And when I first wrote it, the first draft of it was kind of a mess, of course, and it was the longest thing I've ever written. There's no question. I mean, it was like 35,000 words at the beginning. I was appalled because I don't like. I have a strange relationship to words, which is to say I'm ambivalent about them. But I was trying to get in every piece of research I had done. I was so proud of myself at that point, and it doubled back on itself, and it repeated itself, and it went down roads it shouldn't have gone down, and didn't pay off. And again, Jonah, who's such a great editor, was incredibly patient and helpful in giving it a kind of a narrative drive, and really shaping up what I'd only sort of understood intuitively, But yes, outline, absolutely, absolutely.
What are some books that you return to?
Well, again, I love what's spare. When I was writing this, I reread a lot of Janet Malcolm.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
I love nonfiction. And Joan Didion and Eve Babbitt's. I'm stuck on women of the '60s, '70s, and Janet Malcolm, who, of course, her crime reporting is so excellent, and how she talks about the journalist as participant or not in the story. Because I was hesitant to put myself in this story at first. And it's something I had to be sort of talked into. And then I realized, well, of course I'm in this story, and then I had to find a way to allow myself into the story in a way that I was just reading. I read Joan Didion. I like nonfiction. I like people writing about true crime. I like reading people writing about the culture. But both of those writers, very spare, to the point writers, and it's Janet Malcolm who helped me think about how I could be in the story of the Fudge King, because at first I did not want myself in the story. but then I was, led to believe I should be in the story because I was in fact part of the story, and it was true. But I had to make my way into it without it becoming about me. And So I was reading people who were writing about crime while I was doing this.
Yeah, that's
Um,
always a tough decision to make, whether you want to be a presence in the story or not, and then how much so. To what extent are you a guide, or are you part of the story? And that's always a tough decision to make. Sometimes you have to experiment a lot as you go.
well, we did dial it up more than I originally had thought we would. But then I sort of came to peace with it because the fact is Harry's not around to talk to, and it's the one great mystery that remains is what he thought of all this, what he thought of his life that last summer. So it's me speculating on that. So that's how I am in the story. It's me trying to understand what was going through this man's head. This very charming man who loved people, who was actually being targeted by the people in the community that he cared for so much. So that's how I understood I needed to be in the story, sort of speculating on what was maybe going through his head. I still don't ultimately know why Harry Engelmeyer stayed in Ocean City, America's greatest family resort.
Mm-hmm.
He could have been anywhere. He could have opened fudge shops in New York City, where there was a burgeoning gay community, even in the early 60s, or Philadelphia, his hometown, my hometown, uh, in the early 60s, in Rittenhouse Square, where there was a gay community. Um, I don't know why he stayed where he did stay. These questions are my questions about his life because he can't answer them. And so that's how I'm in the story.
Would you have stayed if you were in his shoes?
No,
Yeah.
no, no. I didn't stay.
Yeah.
I left at 18. I left Philadelphia. I left. I, in fact, had not been back to the Jersey Shore since I was a teenager, decades ago, until I went back to celebrate my mother's birthday during the pandemic, at which point my brother, Michael, who is a chocolatier and confection maker himself, told me about this story.
Hmm.
And then I realized I had to go back again. So it's a land I left because I I left because I knew people who were more like me were elsewhere.
Right.
Um, but Harry stayed, and I don't know why. I wish above all I could ask him why he stayed, because that led to his death. It really did. He stayed. He fought. He wanted to make it a different place, not essentially, but just take it a little bit into the future. I know people like that who stay within systems and change them. I don't know that I have that courage. But I marvel at his attachment to that place. And maybe it was his family who he was very close to his family, and his sister had an apartment above Copper Kettle, as did Harry, and her children worked in the shop, and his mother would come visit in the summer. Maybe it was all that. Maybe it's just what he knew growing up. In that way, we're very different people.
Yeah.
But of course, it was a very different time in 1964.
Yeah.
Very
Jeez.
different time. I mean, that's part of it too. I have extraordinary freedoms that man did not. You know, the American Psychiatric Association was calling homosexuality, a sociopathic personality disturbance
Yeah.
at that point.
Oh.
Life magazine, the summer before Harry's death, published this piece about gay people that called them sad and sordid. That was the climate at the time. So I'm not faulting Harry for not heading to New York or to even Philadelphia's gay neighborhood. But he was so forward thinking that I can't help but wonder why he didn't go. You know,
Yeah. over the course of your research and learning more and more about him, what did you come to admire most about him?
Oh, that he was a fighter. He in several places in the investigation files, and in a couple of the press mentions, he's quoted as saying, "I can take care of myself," and it touched me. He was by several accounts a kind of brawler, kind of stocky, and kind of he would tangle with people. But that moved me. I can take care of myself. That was that's what stayed with me most about him. And not only could he take care of himself, he could take care of the people around him. And I just think that's incredible. No self-pity, no, ultimately no real fear. He thought he could power through all his troubles that summer. They were coming for him. Those morals charges that he was accused of, the months before his death, the year before his death, actually. And he stayed. And I can take care of myself. I mean, good for you,
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Well, Tom, as I like to bring these conversations down for a landing, I always ask the guests for a recommendation of some kind, and that can just be anything you're excited about. And so I'd pose that to you as we wind down here. What might you recommend for the listeners out there?
Oh man, well, boy, there must be something going right in my life that I'm overwhelmed with things I might suggest. But I'm going to recommend Janet Malcolm's Two Lives, which is the book I read most recently about Gertrude Stein and Alice B. Toklas. It's a slim book. It is about how these two Jewish lesbians survived during the war in France. It is complex and rich and so astute. Her observations are incredible, and what a writer. So that's what I would recommend.
Oh, fantastic. Well, Tom, if for people who want to maybe get a little more familiar with you and your work, is there any other digital or online footprint where people can go find you?
I have a very limited online footprint, but
good.
In fact,
good for
I don't
you.
have any yes, I don't have any social media. There is a Wikipedia page, and otherwise they'll just have to keep tuning in.
Nice. How do you navigate the internet and just creative work without the social media footprint?
That's a great question, Brendan. I think things come to everybody that should come to everybody, and I'm not sure that having an online presence brings anything more.
Yeah.
I'm a great believer in meeting up with people IRL and seeing what happens, and I find a lot of that to be overstimulating and distracting and putting me elsewhere. I remember when it all began and I thought, oh, this is going to destroy everybody's sense of place.
Mm-hmm.
The sense of actual place will be obliterated because now will be any place or all the places. And so I think, well, whatever might come to me if I have a stronger online presence will have to come to me another way. And if it doesn't, then it's not worth coming,
All right. Thank you to Jonah and to Tom for a lovely conversation about all of this. That's magazine.atavist.com to read this piece and many past issues of incredible work from incredible storytellers. I don't have much by way of a parting shot, and by that I mean I don't have one. This week I don't have it. Okay? BrendanAmaro.com. Hey, for show notes and to sign up for the Rage Against the Algorithm newsletter. Dig it, friend. Stay wild, CNFers. And if you can't do, interview. See ya.